Hey guys, welcome to Smart Intellectual Knowledge about African. I'm Philip S.I.K.A and I'm happy to be with you today. Every decision that you are going to make in your life is going to have two aspects: advantages and inconvenience. The same applies also to the G20 recent decision to welcome the African Union as a permanent member, of the organization. In the previous episode, I discussed the the advantage, of the decision. So in this episode, I'm going to concentrate, on the challenges or the drawbacks. And I can think of a couple of drawbacks. The first challenge is, the first challenge, sorry, that is going to be present is to know exactly who will represent, the continent, the African continent, at the seat, at the finance ministers and central government levels and appointing. The second challenge is also to finding a common position among the African Union member states with different economic powers and structures. The first two challenges, can be actually merged into one critical issue. And why is that? First, the African Union is made of 55 countries, and all 55 countries do not have the same economic structure. That's the first element. Second, every African nation, member of the African Union, do not also have the same national development plan. They don't have the same national strategy. They also do not share the same economic trade interest. So, as a regional institution made of so many countries, how is the African Union going to reconcile those divergences in order to be able to speak with one voice, at the G20? And that is something we should think of that is very important beyond the laudable, decision to welcome the African Union. But in practice, how will that sound? How will the African Union going to manage all the expectation from every single African country, that rightfully have the right to expect some, benefit from this new announcement? Another challenge we also need to think of is whether this permanent membership, is actually going to represent, a substantive change or just a symbolic one. Why? Because if you've listened to the previous episode, the G20 is a very selective organization. To become a member of the G20, or to have been chosen, as a permanent member of the G20, it means that your country or your national economy was, very competitive, was first very competitive. Your economy, was faring and performing very well. Your economy, has strong potential growth. Your economy is well, industrialized. And lastly, your trade balance, is not deficit. you have a positive trade balance. And when looking at most African countries, unfortunately, they do import more goods than they export ones, than they export them, sorry. So let me rephrase. Majority of African countries spend more money to actually acquire goods from their international partner than actually selling more goods and receiving more money, from the international partner. So it's a situation where you actually have $100 money entering in your pocket, while spending $200 money from your own pocket. So you're constantly in the situation where you did not make any profit. And that's actually, unfortunately, the situation of most African countries. Another question we should ask ourselves is why the African Union and not another regional bloc? Well, some experts say it's because of, the very interesting and encouraging, like economic forecast, on the continent, which is partly true and which is also partly a very good argument. But another argument on the other side is to look at the contribution of the African continent in terms of GDP. And unfortunately, the percentage is not as high as we expected. Africa accounts for only 2.84%, or I'd say just 3% of the world GDP. And that's very low. It is also the second smallest economy in the world. So when looking at, these elements, it is very difficult to try and understand whether, this announcement is going to have a substantive impact, in boosting or restructuring, the African economy, or is it just, a symbolic, initiative? And by symbolic initiative, what do I mean? Well, look at the current, competing interest between former international powers such as the USA, France, the UK, and the new emerging markets such as the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And in addition to the BRICS, I would also add Turkey. What do these countries have in common? Well, they actually decided to focus more and to actually develop their economic interest and investment interest in Africa, which now create, a competing, interest with USA, the UK, France, and etc. So it is actually fair to ask ourselves, would this kind of decision, might have taken place 20 years ago when Africa did not actually, create so much interest, from other countries' perspectives. I mean, 20 years ago, Chinese investment in Africa were small or close to non-existent. Indian investment, Turkish investment, where it was the same, small to close to non-existent. So why now, and why not earlier? And another critical aspect of this decision is to also look at the, it's very important to look at the how can I put it? What I'm trying to say is, well, was the African Union, the most relevant regional bloc to actually join the G20 as a permanent member, given the current economic context? But secondly, it is also, we also need to try and understand the message out there. And this is something you won't hear from the traditional news channel and expert, but this is my personal opinion, because when I look at the structure of the G20, it is made of 19 countries, you know, and out of those 19 countries, there is only one African country, South Africa. And in my opinion, sent it would have actually sent a stronger message out there if, instead of seeing or having the African Union as a new permanent member, we had instead a new or another or few other African countries joining the G20. And I can think of, Nigeria, I can think of Kenya, I can think of Cote d'Ivoire, I can think of, these African countries, based on their, latest economic performance over the last 10 years. It would have actually sent a strong messages, though they are not at the same level as China, Brazil, India, and China, but they actually capitalize a strong percentage and strong percentage of economic growth. And it would have been a stronger message, instead of having the African Union joining the G20. Because right now, what I can understand, or one of the many messages is sent out there, it implies that, taken individually, African countries are not good enough to become member of the G20, because their economy has not reached an optimal level yet. That's the message out there. What do you think? Thank you for listening to S.I.K.A Talks, where strong beliefs meet powerful perspectives. À bientôt.